Hello and welcome to EMR Optimization for Cancer Screening, Accuro EMR. This video is training module number 1 and the topic is Data Discipline and Standardization. Please take a moment to review our speaker disclosure slide. The objectives of this training video are to help Accuro users understand the basic principles of data standardization, learn how to apply data standards to cancer screening, and learn tips for cleaning the data that is already in the EMR. So what do we mean by data discipline? Well, we've defined it here as an understanding of and commitment to maintaining rigorous data standards in the EMR within the practice. Okay, fine. But then what do we mean by data standards? Well, this refers to the data entry practices used in your clinic. Specifically, we're talking about making sure that information is entered consistently into all patient records so that ultimately we can create meaningful reports. This requires that we enter data into consistent fields, use consistent terminology, and most important, for data standards to work, they have to be adopted by everyone using the EMR. So let's use a concrete example. We know that cancer screening test results come in a variety of ways. Some tests may come in the mail as a paper record that has to be scanned in. Others may come in electronically through a direct feed from the lab. Regardless of how the test comes in, a user in the practice is going to have to decide how to attach the result to a patient chart and how they're going to classify the record. Now, there may be more than one way to classify a test result, but data standardization teaches us that we need to make sure we are classifying the test in the same way that we will intend to search for the result later. To demonstrate with an example, say your office receives a Pap test result for a certain patient. A member of the office staff may classify this Pap test as a Pap test report in the Documents category and in the Type field. This on its own may be fine, but if in a few months the physician in the office wants to search for patients who have had recent Pap tests done, and they only create a search that looks for tests classified as cervix culture, which is found in the Lab category and in the Lab Type field, the patient's test results will not be found. Data standardization helps us think about what kind of data we may wish to search for later, and that drives how information needs to be entered in the first place. Another great example is with patient medical history. There are numerous fields in the patient profile that lets users manage their data entry. History of problems, surgical medical history, family history, and risk factors are a few of those fields, and all of them can be searched to find patients with specific medical history criteria. If data is not entered into those fields consistently, you're going to find that it will be very difficult to use these fields to identify patients who may be due for a cancer screening procedure. Data standardization allows teams to come to agreement on standard terminology or codes that can be used in every case. Cancer Care Ontario has developed a process to establish data standards for cancer screening. By completing our 4 worksheets, your team can improve data discipline by identifying the criteria relevant to cancer screening and determining how data is currently entered into the EMR, documenting the data standards you wish to adopt, and finding inconsistent records that can be changed to align with your new standards. Remember, data standardization works best when more people have an opportunity to provide input. And once your data standards are set, it's important to make sure that they are communicated regularly to everyone who uses the EMR. After your data standards are in place, data cleansing will be needed in order to get old records in line with the new standards. We have a number of tips that can help you conduct data cleansing activities in your practice. The first is, of course, to make sure you have everyone on board. If even one member of the team is entering data in a different way, this can have a big impact on your ability to create accurate reports. Second, make sure to reinforce your data standards through repeated communication. In a busy practice, it's easy to fall back on old habits, and everyone can use a refresher from time to time. As we all know, practice makes perfect. Third, even after your existing data has been cleansed, you will still need to revisit this from time to time. Just like you need to do spring cleaning at home, mistakes in data entry will occur throughout the year that should be fixed when you have an opportunity. Some practices have found it very helpful to use temporary staff, like summer students, to conduct a data cleansing exercise each year. Lastly, you can use your EMR's search functionality to help you find variability in your records. Let me elaborate. Searches can give you insight into the various ways records may be entered into your EMR. As I mentioned before, lab tests come into your practice in a variety of ways. By paper, which need to be scanned in, or through an electronic feed from the labs. Running a search for Pap test report under the Documents category in the Type field may bring up 130 patients. This tells you that using this classification is a common practice for manually entering test results in your EMR. but an electronic feed from a lab may automatically code Pap test results using its own unique terminology. One example would be the term cervix culture under the labs category in the lab type field. Running a search for this type of report may bring up 12 patients. This tells you that even though it's not as common, you will need to include this criteria in your searches if you wish to accurately find patients due for cervical screening. Another lab may use the term cytopathology for their reports. If you run a search for this report and find no results, it means you don't receive reports this way and that this criteria is not necessary to include in your future searches. Just remember, if your team does not account for all the ways that lab tests are entered into your system, then your search results will include patients who are not due for screening. Searches can also help with your data cleansing when you layer on criteria line by line and run the search after each line. In this example, we find that running a search for all female patients, ages 50 to 74, turns up 550 patients. Adding the next line, which looks for those patients who have not had a mammogram in 24 months, narrows down our previous list to 330 patients. Adding the next line, which looks for those patients with no history of breast cancer, again narrows down the list to 315 patients. Now we add one more line to see if it will narrow down our results even more. But what we find with this line of search criteria, which looks for patients with no BRCA gene mutation, is that it has no effect on our search results. This tells us something very important, that maybe we aren't entering data correctly for this criteria. Knowing this, we need to explore further and decide if we need to clean our data or change our data standards to align with how we've been keeping records of the BRCA gene mutation. Don't worry too much about how searches work at this point. We'll be covering how to create and run searches in our next topic. And that brings us to the end of training module number 1. Additional resources are available for this module. A tip sheet has been provided with more tips for data cleansing in your practice. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we encourage your team to check out the 4 worksheets available for data standardization. Before you move on, please take a moment to complete the short quiz that will test what you've learned in this module. Our next video topic is on using searches for cancer screening. Thanks very much for watching.